Lady Chatterley's lover. And this is Morel Bernard. Welcome to Lady Chatterley's Lover, the continuation of it. I think that the last time I spoke that I said something about, we're talking about class, different ruling class and so forth. What was the point when even the smartest aristocrats had really nothing positive of their own to hold, and their rule was really a farce, not rule at all? What was the point? It was all cold nonsense. A sense of rebellion smouldered in Connie. What was the good of it all? What was the good of her sacrifice, her devoting her life to Clifford? What was she serving, after all? A cold spirit of vanity that had no warm human contacts, and that was as corrupt as any low-born Jew in craving for prostitution to the bitch goddess, success. Even Clifford's cool and contactless assurance that he belonged to the ruling class didn't prevent his tongue lolling out of his mouth as he panted after the bitch goddess. After all, Michaelese was really more dignified in the manner, and far, far more successful, really. If you look closely at Clifford, he was a buffoon, and a buffoon is more humiliating than a bounder. As between the two men, Michaelese really had far more use for her than Clifford had. He'd even more need of her. Any good nurse can attempt to crippled legs. And as for the heroic effort, Michael's was a heroic rat, and Clifford was very much of a poodle showing off. There were people staying in the house, among them Clifford's Aunt Eva, Lady Bennerley. She was a thin woman of 60 with a red nose, a widow, and still something of a grande dame. She belonged to one of the best families and had the character to carry it off. Connie liked her. She was so perfectly simple and frank, as far as she intended to be frank, and superficially kind. Inside her, she was a past mistress in holding her own and holding other people a little lower. She was not at all a snob, far too sure of herself. She was perfect at the social sport of coolly holding her own and making other people defer to her. She was kind to Connie, and tried to worm into her woman's soul with a sharp gimlet of her well-born observations. "You're quite wonderful, in my opinion," she said to Connie. "You've done wonders for Clifford. I never saw any budding genius myself, and there he is, all the rage." Aunt Eva was quite complacently proud of Clifford's success. Another feather in the family's cap. She didn't care a straw about his books, but why should she? "Oh, I don't think it's my doing," said Connie. "It must be. Can't be anybody's else. And it seems to me you don't get enough out of it." "How?" "Well, look at the way you are shut up here. I said to Clifford, if that child rebels one day, you'll have yourself to thank." "But Clifford never denies me anything," said Connie. "Look here, my dear child." And Lady Bennerley laid her thin hand on Connie's arm. "A woman has to live her life, or live to repent not having lived it, believe me." And she took another sip of brandy, which maybe was her form of repentance. "But I do live my life, don't I?" "Not in my idea. Clifford should bring you to London and let you go about. His sort of friends are all right for him, but what are they for you? If I were you, I should think it wasn't good enough. You let your youth slip by. and you'll spend your old age and your middle age too repenting it." Her ladyship lapsed into contemplative silence, soothed by the brandy. But Connie was not keen on going to London and being steered into the smart world by Lady Bentley. She didn't feel really smart. It wasn't interesting. And she did feel the peculiar withering coldness under it all, like the soil of Labrador, which is gay little flowers on its surface and a foot down is frozen. Tommy Jukes was at Wraby, and another man, Harry Winterslow, and Jack Strangeways with his wife Olive. The talk was much more desultory than when only the cronies were there, and everybody was a bit bored, for the weather was bad, and there was only billiards and the pianola to dance to. Olive was reading a book about the future when babies would be bred in bottles and women would be immunized. "Jolly good thing too," she said. "Then a woman can live her own life." Strangeways wanted children, and she didn't. "How'd you like to be immunized?" Winterslow asked her with an ugly smile. "I hope I am, naturally," she said. "Anyhow, the future's going to have more sense, and a woman needn't be dragged down by her functions." "Perhaps she'll float off into space altogether," said Jukes. "I do think sufficient civilization ought to eliminate a lot of the physical disabilities," said Clifford. "All the love business, for example, it might just as well go." "I suppose it would if we could breed babies in bottles." "No," cried Olive. "That might leave all the more room for fun." "I suppose," said Lady Bentley contemplatively, "if the love business went, something else would take its place. Morphia, perhaps. A little morphine in all the air. It would be wonderfully refreshing for everybody." "The government releasing ether into the air on Saturday for a cheerful weekend," said Jack. "Sounds all right, but where should we be by Wednesday?" "So long as you can forget your body, you are happy," said Lady Bentley. "And the moment you begin to be aware of your body, you are wretched. So, if civilization is any good, it has to help us forget our bodies, and then time passes happily without our knowing it." "Help us get rid of our bodies altogether," said Winterslow. "It's quite time man began to improve on his own nature, especially the physical side of it." "Imagine if we floated like tobacco smoke," said Connie. "It won't happen," said Jukes. "Our old show will come flop. Our civilization is going to fall. It's going down the bottomless pit, down the chasm. And believe me, the only bridge across the chasm will be the phallus." "Oh, do be impossible, General," cried Olive. "I believe our civilization is going to collapse," said Aunt Eva. "And what will come after it?" asked Clifford. "I haven't the faintest idea, but something, I suppose," said the elderly lady. "Connie says some people like whips or smoke, and Olive says immunize women and babies in bottle, and Duke says the phallus is a bridge to what comes next. I wonder what it will really be," said Clifford. "Oh, don't bother. Let's get on with today," said Olive. "Only hurry up with the breeding bottle and let us poor women off." "There might even be real men in the next phase," said Tommy. "Real, intelligent, wholesome men and wholesome, nice women. Wouldn't that be a change, an enormous change from us? We're not men, and the women aren't women. We're only separated makeshifts, mechanical and intellectual experiments. There may even come a civilization of genuine men and women instead of our little lot of clever jacks, all at the intelligence age of 7. It would be even more amazing that men of smoke or babies in bottles. Oh, when people begin to talk about real women, I give up, said Olive. Certainly nothing but the spirit in us is worth having, said Winslow. Spirits, said Jack, drinking his whiskey and soda. Think so. Give me the resurrection of the body, said Jukes. But it'll come in time, when we've shoved the cerebral stone away a bit, the money and the rest. Then we'll get a democracy of touch instead of a democracy of pocket. Something echoed inside Connie. Give me the democracy of touch, the resurrection of the body. She didn't at all know what it meant, but it comforted her, as meaningless things may do. Anyhow, everything was terribly silly, and she was exasperatedly bored by it all, by Clifford, by Aunt Eva, by Olive and Jack and Winterlow, and even by Jukes. Talk, talk, talk. What hell it was. The continual rattle of it. And then, when all the people went, it was no better. She continued plodding on, but exasperation and irritation had got hold of her low body. She couldn't escape. The days seemed to grind by with curious painfulness, yet nothing happened. Only, she was getting thinner. Even the housekeeper noticed this and asked her about herself. Even Tommy Jukes insisted she was not well, though she said she was all right. Only she began to be afraid of the ghastly white tombstone, that peculiar loathsome whiteness of Carrara marble, detestable as false teeth, which stuck up on the hillside on the terracial church, and which she saw with such grim painfulness from the park. The bristling of the hideous false teeth of tombstone on the hill affected her with a grisly kind of horror. She felt the time not far off when she would be buried there, added to the ghastly host under the tombstones and the monuments in these filthy Midlands. She needed help, and she knew it. So she wrote a little letter to her sister, Hilda. I'm not well lately, and I don't know what's the matter with me. Down posted Hilda from Scotland, where she'd taken up her abode. She came in March alone, driving herself in a nimble two-seater. Up the drive she came, tooting up the incline, then sweeping round the oval of grass where the 2 great wild beech trees stood on the flat in front of the house. Connie had run out to the steps. Hilda pulled up her car, got out and kissed her sister. "But Connie," she cried, "whatever is the matter?" "Nothing," said Connie, rather shamefacedly, but she knew how she had suffered in contrast to Hilda. Both sisters had the same rather golden, glowing skin and soft brown hair and naturally strong, warm physique. But now Connie was thin and earthy-looking, with a craggy, yellowish neck that stuck out of her jumper. "But you're ill, child," said Hilda, in the soft, rather breathless voice that both sisters had alike. Hilda was nearly, but not quite, 2 years older than Connie. "No, not ill, perhaps. I'm bored," said Connie, a little pathetically. The light of battle glowed in Hilda's face. She was a woman, soft and still as she seemed, of the old Amazon sort, not made to fit with men. "This wretched place," she said softly, looking at poor old lumbering Wraby with real hate. She looked soft and warm herself as a ripe pear, and she was an Amazon of the real old breed. She went quietly in to Clifford. He thought how handsome she looked, but also he shrank from her. His wife's family did not have his sort of manners or his sort of etiquette. He considered them rather outsiders, but once they got inside, they made him jump through the hoop. He sat square and well-groomed in his chair, his hair sleek and blonde, and his face fresh, his blue eyes pale and a little prominent, his expression inscrutable, but well-bred. Hilda thought it sulky and stupid, and he waited. He had an air of aplomb, but Hilda didn't care what he had an air of. She was up in arms, and if he'd been Pope or Emperor, it would have been just the same. "Connie's looking awfully unwell," she said in a soft voice, fixing him with her beautiful, glowering grey eyes. She looked so maidenly, so did Connie, but he well knew the tone of Scottish obstinacy underneath. "She's a little thinner," he said. "Haven't you done anything about it?" "Do you think it necessary?" he asked with his suavest English stiffness, for the two things often go together. Hilda only glowered at him without replying. Repartee was not her forte, nor Connie, so he glowered, and he was much more uncomfortable than if she had said things. "I'll take her to a doctor," said Hilda at length. "Can you suggest a good one round here?" "I'm afraid I can't." "Then I'll take her to London, where we have a doctor we trust." Though boiling with rage, Clifford said nothing. "I suppose I may as well stay the night," said Hilda, pulling off her gloves, "and I'll drive her to town tomorrow." Clifford was yellow at the gills with anger, and at evening time the whites of his eyes were a little yellow too. He ran to Liver, but Hilda was consistently modest and maidenly. "You must have a nurse or somebody to look after you personally. You should really have a manservant," said Hilda, as they sat with apparent calmness at coffee after dinner. She spoke in a soft, seemingly gentle way, but Clifford felt she was hitting him on the head with a bludgeon. "You think so?" he said coldly. "I'm sure. It's necessary. Either that or father and I must take Connie away for some months. This can't go on." "What can't go on?" "Haven't you looked at the child?" asked Hilda, gazing at him full stare. He looked rather like a huge boiled crayfish at the moment, or so he thought. "Connie and I will discuss it," he said. "I've already discussed it with her," said Hilda. Clifford had been long enough in the hands of nurses he hated them, because they left him no real privacy. And a manservant, he couldn't stand a man hanging round him. Almost better any woman, but why not Connie? The two sisters drove off in the morning, Connie looking rather like an Easter lamb, rather small beside Hilda, who held the wheel. Sir Malcolm was away, but the Kensington house was open. The doctor examined Connie carefully and asked her all about her life. "I see your photograph and Sir Clifford's in the illustrated papers sometimes. Almost notorieties, aren't you? That's how the quiet little girls grow up, though you're only a quiet little girl even now, in spite of the illustrated papers. No, there's nothing organically wrong. But it won't do. It won't do. Tell Sir Clifford he's got to bring you to town or take you abroad and amuse you. You've got to be amused. Got to. Your vitality is much too low. No reserves. No reserves. The nerves of the heart a bit queer already. Oh, yes. Nothing but nerves. I'd put you right in a month at Cannes or Brest. But it mustn't go on. Mustn't, I tell you. Or I won't be answerable for consequences. You're spending your life without renewing it. You've got to be amused, properly, healthily amused. You're spending your vitality without making any. Can't go on, you know. Depression. Avoid depression. Hilda set her jaw, and that meant something. Michaelis heard they were in town and came running with roses. "Why, what's wrong?" he cried. "You're a shadow of yourself. Why, I never saw such a change. Why ever didn't you let me know? Come to Nice with me. Come down to Sicily. Go on, come to Sicily with me. It's lovely there just now. You want sun. You want life. Why, you're wasting away. Come away with me. Come to Africa. Oh, hang Sir Clifford. Chuck him. And come along with me. I'll marry you the minute he divorces you. Come along and try a life. God's love. That place Wraby would kill anybody. Beastly place, foul place, kill anybody. Come away with me into the sun. It's the sun you want, of course, and a bit of normal life. But Connie's heart simply stood still at the thought of abandoning Clifford there and then. She couldn't do it. No. She just couldn't. She had to go back to Wraby. Michaelese was disgusted. Hilda didn't like Michaelese, but she almost preferred him to Clifford. Back went the sisters to the Midlands. Hilda talked to Clifford, who still had yellow eyeballs when they got back. He too, in his way, was overwrought, but he had to listen to all Hilda said, to all the doctor had said, not what Michaelese had said, of course, and he sat mum through the ultimatum. Here is the address of a good manservant who was with an invalid patient of the doctor's till he died last month. He's really a good man, and fairly sure to come. But I'm not an invalid, and I will not have a manservant, said Clifford, poor devil. And here are the addresses of 2 women. I saw one of them. She would do very well, a woman of about 50, quiet, strong, kind, and in a way cultured. Clifford only sulked and would not answer. Very well, Clifford. If we don't settle something by tomorrow, I shall telegraph to father, and we shall take Connie away. Will Connie go? Asked Clifford. She doesn't want to, but she knows that she must. Mother died of cancer, brought on by fretting. We're not running any risk. So next day, Clifford suggested Mrs. Bolton, Tavishal's parish nurse. Apparently, Mrs. Betts had thought of her. Mrs. Bolton was just retiring from her parish duties to take up private nursing jobs. Clifford had a queer dread of delivering himself into the hands of a stranger, but this Mrs. Bolton had once nursed him through scarlet fever, and he knew her. The 2 sisters at once called on Mrs. Bolton in a newish house in a row, quite select from Terrashall. They found a rather good-looking woman of 40-odd, in a nurse's uniform with a wide collar and apron, just making herself tea in a small, crowded sitting room. Mrs. Bolton was most attentive and polite, seemed quite nice, spoke with a bit of a broad slur, but in heavily correct English, and from having bossed the sick colliers for a good many years, had a very good opinion of herself and a fair amount of assurance. In short, in her tiny way, one of the governing class in the village, very much respected. Yes, Lady Chatterley, not looking at all well. Why, she used to be that bonny, didn't she now? But she's been failing all winter. Oh, it's hard, it is. Poor Sir Clifford. That war. It's a lot to answer for. And Mrs. Bolton would go to Wraby at once, if Dr. Shardo would let her off. She had another fortnight parish nursing to do by rights, but they might get a substitute, you know. Hilda posted off to Dr. Shardlow, and on the following Sunday, Mrs. Bolton drove up in Lever's cab to Wraby with 2 trunks. Hilda had talks with her. Mrs. Bolton was ready at any moment to talk, and she seemed so young. The way the passion would flush in her rather pale cheek. She was 47. Her husband, Ted Bolton, had been killed in the pit 22 years ago. 22 years last Christmas. just at Christmas time, leaving her with 2 children, one a baby in arms. Oh, the baby was married now, Edith, to a young man in Boots Cash Chemist in Sheffield. The other one was a schoolteacher in Chesterfield. She came home weekends when she wasn't asked out somewhere. Young folks enjoy themselves nowadays, not like when she, Ivy Bolton, was young. Ted Bolton was 28 when life was killed in an explosion down the pit. The butty in front shouted to them all to lie down quick. There were 4 of them, and they all lay down in time, only Ted, and it killed him. Then, at the inquiry, on the master's side, they said Ted had been frightened and trying to run away and not obeying orders, so it was like his fault, really. So the compensation was only £300, and they made out as if it was more of a gift than legal compensation because it was really the man's own fault. And they wouldn't let her have the money down. She wanted to have a little shop, but they said that she'd no doubt squander it, perhaps in drink, so she had to draw it 30 shillings a week. Yes, she had to go every Monday morning down to the offices and stand there a couple of hours waiting her turn. Yes, for almost 4 years she went every Monday. And what could she do with 2 little children on her hands? But Ted's mother was very good to her. When the baby could toddle, she'd keep both the children for the day, while she, Ivy Bolton, went to Sheffield and attended classes in ambulance, and then the 4th year she even took a nursing course and got qualified. She was determined to be independent and keep her children, so she was assistant at Youthwaite Hospital, just a little place for a while. But when the company, the Tevershaw Colliery Company, really Sir Geoffrey, saw that she could get on by herself, they were very good to her, gave her the parish nursing and stood by her. She would say that for them. And she'd done it ever since, till now it was getting a bit much for her. She needed something a bit lighter. There was such a lot of trapezing around if you were a district nurse. Yes, the company's very good to me. I always say it. But I should never forget what they said about Ted, for he was as steady and fearless a chap as ever set foot on the cage, and it was as good as branding him a coward. But there, he was dead, and could say nothing to none of them. It was a queer mixture of feelings the woman showed as she talked. She liked the Colliers, whom she had nursed for so long, but she felt very superior to them. She felt almost upper class, and at the same time a resentment against the ruling class smouldered in her. The masters. In a dispute between masters and men, she was always for the men. But when there was no question of contest, she was pining to be superior, to be one of the upper class. The upper classes fascinated her, appealing to her peculiar English passion for superiority. She was thrilled to come to Wraby, thrilled to talk to Lady Chatterley, my word, different from the common colliers' wives. She said so in so many words. Yet one could see a grudge against the Chatterleys peep out in her, the grudge against the masters. Why, yes, of course, it would wear Lady Chatterley out. It's a mercy she had a sister to come and help her. Men don't think, high and low alike, they take what a woman does for them for granted. Oh, I've told the Colliers off about it many times. But it's very hard for Sir Clifford, you know, crippled like that. They were always a haughty family, standoffish in a way, as they've a right to be, but then to be brought down like that. And it's very hard on Lady Chatterley, perhaps harder on her. What she misses. I only had Ted 3 years, but my word, while I had him, I had a husband I could never forget. He was 1 in 1,000 and jolly as the day. Who'd ever have thought he'd get killed? I don't believe it to this day somehow. I've never believed it, though I washed him with my own hands. But he was never dead for me. He never was. I never took it in. This was a new voice in Wraby, very new for Connie to hear. It roused a new ear in her. For the first week or so, Mrs. Bolton, however, was very quiet at Wraby. Her assured, bossy manner left her, and she was nervous. With Clifford, she was shy, almost frightened and silent. He liked that, and soon recovered his self-possession, letting her go do things for him without even noticing her. She's a useful non-entity, he said. Connie opened her eyes in wonder, but she did not contradict him. So different are impressions on two different people. And he soon became rather superb, somewhat lordy with the nurse. She had rather expected it, and he played up without knowing, so susceptibly. We are to what is expected of us. The Colliers had been so like children, talking to her and telling her what hurt them while she bandaged them or nursed them. They'd always made her feel so grand, almost superhuman in her administrations. Now Clifford made her feel small and like a servant, and she accepted it without a word, adjusting herself to the upper classes. She came very mute, with her long, handsome face and downcast eyes, to administer him, and she said very humbly, "Shall I do this now, Sir Clifford? Shall I do that?" "No, leave it for a time. I'll have it done later." "Very well, Sir Clifford." "Coming again in half an hour." "Very well, Sir Clifford." "And just take those old papers out with you." "Very well, Sir Clifford." She went softly, and in half an hour she came softly again. She was bullied, but she didn't mind. She was experiencing the upper classes. She neither resented nor disliked Clifford. He was just part of a phenomenon, the phenomenon of the high-class folks, so far unknown to her, but now to be known. She felt more at home with Lady Chatterley, and after all, it's the mistress of the house that matters most. Why not join me? Join me for the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Join me, Morel Bernard, for the next episode of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Love reading for you, love reading for you. Join me for the next episode of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Until then, bye for now. Bye.